Welcome back to Sustainable Sense. Today's episode tackles one of the biggest issues of our time and features a recent news topic: climate change and the most recent presidential debate. You guys really loved my last debate episode with Biden and Trump, so this time we're rolling in a Harris versus Trump episode. Specifically, we'll dive into what drives climate change and how two of the most prominent figures, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, view the issue. One thing's for sure: climate change is clearly at the back burner of both of the candidates' minds. Harris talked about investments in clean energy under the current Biden administration, but stopped short of describing her own plan for tackling climate change if elected president. Trump used his time to attack the Biden-Harris administration's record on manufacturing jobs. He promised to put tariffs on foreign-made cars so that they can't come into our country, but did not tie the issue back to reducing planet-warming emissions. Both responses were speculative and unclear, prompting further discussion as to whose hands will be responsible for carrying our massive impact. But enough with the side commentary. Let's just dive right in. Welcome to Sustainable Sense, where we invest in climate defense. You're in for our hot take on all things money, markets, and the environment. First, let's talk about the root causes of climate change. According to the vast majority of scientists, human activity, particularly the burning of fossil fuels, is the primary driver. This releases greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, trapping heat and warming the planet. However, there are different views on just how much of climate change is driven by human actions. Let's start with Harris's perspective. Kamala Harris, the current vice president, views climate change as an existential threat. She firmly believes that human activity, especially the burning of fossil fuels, is the main driver of global warming. In 2019, as a presidential candidate, Harris proposed a $10 trillion climate plan to address this by investing in renewable energy and holding major polluters accountable. She bases most of her claims off the fact that people are losing their fire insurance and insurance premiums are going up. Looking at the pros of her argument, her stance aligns with the scientific consensus, which supports the idea that human activity is a key contributor to climate change. We've seen this trend since the Industrial Revolution, but it has become more imminent now. Her approach also includes aggressive actions to reduce climate emissions, which many argue is necessary to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And lastly, her plan includes investments in renewable energy, which could create jobs and foster technological advancements. Now, taking a look at the cons, critics argue that her policies could come with higher costs, potentially burdening taxpayers. We'll look a little bit more at taxes later in the episode. And some worry that rapid shifts away from fossil fuels could disrupt industries and hurt workers in traditional energy sectors like coal and oil. A phased-in approach might be more appropriate. And lastly, there are concerns that aggressive government intervention could stifle market-driven innovation and efficiency. Now let's look at Trump's perspective. Former President Donald Trump takes a more cautious approach to climate change. While he acknowledges that human activity might contribute to global warming, he doesn't see it as the primary driver. Trump has repeatedly expressed skepticism about climate science, at times calling global warming a hoax. During his presidency, Trump rolled back many environmental regulations, arguing that they were burdensome for businesses. He takes a more capitalist approach to climate change. Looking at the pros of Trump's argument, his focus on deregulation is appealing to industries that feel overburdened by environmental policies. By rolling back regulations, Trump aimed to protect jobs, particularly in traditional energy sectors like coal and oil. Trump's emphasis on economic growth over environmental regulation appeals to those who are concerned about short-term economic impacts, such as job losses and higher energy prices. His view that the market should play a larger role aligns with the ideas that innovation can thrive without government interference. On the flip side, critics argue that his stance undermines efforts to address a growing global crisis. Many don't see the need to address an issue only until the effects are visible in the present. Ignoring or downplaying the role of human activity in climate change could lead to insufficient action, resulting in worsening impacts like rising temperatures and more extreme weather. Additionally, many scientists warn that deregulation increases pollution and could cause long-term economic harm by failing to transition to cleaner energy sources. If elected to a second term, Trump claims that he would make America the dominant energy producer in the world, by far. cancel the electric vehicle mandate, and end market distorting restrictions on oil, natural gas, and coal, according to the platform on his campaign website. On a different note, during the debate, Trump said that he's a big fan of solar, but claims solar farms are not good things for the environment because of the vast acreage needed for large scale solar. He said they need a whole desert to gain some energy to come out. In a post debate fact check, the Atmos magazine called the claim partly true, but misleading, noting the largest solar project in the US is over 4,000 acres in the Mojave Desert, but that most solar installations are much smaller. Now let's talk about extreme weather events, such as hurricanes, wildfires, and heat waves. Many of you have seen them this year, with increasing frequency and strength. Many scientists believe climate change is making these disasters more intense and frequent. Kamala Harris has repeatedly emphasized that climate change is worsening these events. In 2022, she announced over $1 billion in grants to help states address flooding and extreme heat, which she believes are being exacerbated by global warming. This argument aligns with climate models and research that show increasing global temperatures contribute to more intense storms and droughts. Her approach involves proactive measures like funding to prepare for and mitigate the impacts of extreme weather, which could save lives and reduce economic losses. However, some critics believe her focus on climate change as the main factor behind extreme weather oversimplifies the issue, as natural weather variability also plays a role. Oversimplification can skew causation. Some argue that massive government spending on climate initiatives could be used elsewhere for more immediate economic or infrastructure needs. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has often downplayed the link between climate change and extreme weather. He suggested that issues like poor forest management rather than climate change are responsible for more destructive wildfires. At a rally in 2022, he mocked concerns about sea level rise, prioritizing other national issues over climate threats. As mentioned earlier, people don't see the urgency of an event until it's too late, when the effects are neatly displayed in front of them. And this issue is nonpartisan. But looking at the pros of Trump's views, Trump's focus on immediate factors like forest management suggests more direct and perhaps quicker solutions to some weather-related disasters. Trump takes an approach to address the effects rather than addressing the root cause, which may prove beneficial for those directly impacted by severe weather events. His approach reflects a view of some that focusing too heavily on climate change can distract from other pressing economic and geopolitical issues. On the flip side, critics argue that ignoring the link between climate change and extreme weather risks only leads to ignorance, which makes these disasters worse in the long term. Failing to address the root causes of climate change could increase costs associated with disaster relief and recovery in the future. Prevention is the best medicine, as some say. It may be cheaper to prevent rather than to extinguish every immediate effect. Now, what about fracking? Something never talked about on our podcast before, fracking is a method used to extract oil and natural gas from deep rock formations, such as shale. The process involves injecting a mixture of water, sand, and chemicals into a well at high pressure to crack the rock and release the trapped oil and gas. Trump states that if Harris is elected, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one. While Harris claimed that she was in favor of banning fracking back in 2019, she has since renounced her position. Let's fact-check the claim about fracking. While a president could ban fracking on a federal land, only Congress can ban fracking on private and state land. Pennsylvania's fracking boom has relied on mostly privately held leases. The state also leases land for oil and gas drilling, but there's very little federal land in Pennsylvania available to frack. So it's not really up to the president for the majority of the fracking issue in Pennsylvania. Now let's shift to solutions. Should climate change be tackled through government action, or should we let market forces decide? Harris has not yet released a detailed climate plan, but her campaign website says she will unite Americans to tackle the climate crisis and fight for the freedom to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and live free from the pollution that fuels the climate crisis. Kamala Harris supports a blend of both government intervention and the invisible hand effect of the market, but leans more heavily on government action. She believes that the government needs to step in with policies like carbon pricing and subsidies for renewable energy. In her view, relying solely on the market mechanisms can leave marginalized communities behind, as market-driven solutions often prioritize profits, especially for the top brackets, over people. The pros of Harris's approach include government action can provide large-scale, coordinated effort needed to combat a global crisis. and public investments can accelerate the transition to renewable energy and ensure that underserved communities aren't left behind. Now, looking at the cons, critics worry that too much government intervention could stifle private innovation and lead to inefficiencies. There are also concerns about the cost of these programs, which could lead to higher taxes or deficits. Donald Trump, on the other hand, favors market-based solutions. His administration rolled back more than 125 environmental regulations, arguing that reducing government intervention would allow the market to innovate and grow. He's expressed concern that too much regulation could harm the economy and raise costs for consumers. He and the invisible hand are clearly on good terms. Looking at the positives of his approach, market-driven solutions can foster innovation as companies compete to develop new technologies, and less regulation can lead to lower costs for businesses, which could result in economic growth and job creation. On the other hand, critics argue that market forces alone won't address the urgency of the climate crisis, especially since profit-driven businesses may not prioritize long-term environmental goals. This is a shift that definitely won't happen overnight. There's also a risk that without government intervention, vulnerable communities could suffer the most from the effects of climate change. Finally, let's touch on clean energy tax credits, particularly for electric vehicles or EVs. Kamala Harris supports tax credits and subsidies for electric vehicles and other green technologies. As vice president, she played a key role in passing the Inflation Reduction Act, which offers tax credits for EVs and energy-efficient home projects. Tax credits can help make clean energy technologies more affordable, encouraging wider adoption and helping to reduce emissions. Supporting clean energy industries could create jobs and boost innovation in renewable technologies. However, critics argue that these subsidies can distort the market, propping up industries that may not be ready to compete without government support. There are also concerns that these tax credits disproportionately benefit the wealthier individuals who can't afford electric vehicles in the first place. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has criticized these subsidies, arguing that they benefit the wealthy at the expense of everyday Americans. He said that most Americans can't afford electric vehicles and don't want them. His argument reflects concerns that EVs are still too expensive for many customers, and government subsidies could be better spent elsewhere. He believes that rolling back subsidies could encourage the EV industry to become more competitive and efficient on its own. However, without government support, the transition to clean energy may slow down, delaying efforts to reduce emissions. Critics also argue that short-term economic benefits could come at a cost of long-term sustainability goals, which we touched on earlier. Wrapping it up, here's what Wall Street thinks of Harris and Trump. Wall Street largely concluded that Vice President Kamala Harris won the debate against former President Donald Trump. Following the debate, solar and clean energy stocks experienced an uptick, with the Invesco Solar ETF and iShares Global Clean Energy ETF gaining over 2% in early trading. Shares of Trump Media and Technology Group, the parent company of Trump's Truth Social platform, plummeted over 16% the day after the debate, hitting an all-time low. The debate outcome is seen as consequential for Wall Street, potentially affecting various sectors and investment strategies. For example, Harris is viewed as more supportive of clean energy initiatives, while Trump is seen as more favorable to fossil fuels and cryptocurrency. Wall Street billionaires and executives are split in their support between Harris and Trump, with donations fairly evenly distributed across various firms. Another thing to consider is Harris's billionaire minimum tax on unrealized capital gains. And lastly, some analysts suggest that Trump trades, which are stocks expected to benefit from a Trump presidency, have been showing a shaky trend as Harris gains ground in the polls. Overall, the sentiment from Wall Street appears to lean slightly towards Harris following the debate, but the race is still seen as competitive and consequential for various market sectors. So, what do you think? Should climate change be addressed through aggressive government action, or should we trust the market to find the best solutions? Both perspectives offer valid points, and the challenge is finding a balance that tackles the crisis without causing unnecessary harm to the economy or society. So, that's it for today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow our show and like it up. Remember, every small step towards sustainability makes a huge difference. Be sure to subscribe for more insights into the sustainable side of economic development, and make sure to rate our show 5 stars. So, you can find us on LinkedIn and Instagram at sustainablecentspodcast. If you have any questions or episode suggestions, you can email us at sustainablecentspodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's sustainablecentspodcast@gmail.com. Until next time. This is your host, signing off. And as always, invest your sense in climate defense.